We are Team 2, and we were given the topic of managing informal institutions with a focus on culture, norms, and ethics. My name is Colin Hennigan, and my teammates are Matthew, Melanie, Jeremiah, and Nicole. After searching for articles about our assigned topic, we decided to narrow the focus to primarily norms and ethics. We discovered a very recent event involving deals between the United States, France, Australia, and Great Britain. Government deals can have a huge impact on international business, especially if the deal goes wrong and many parties are upset. For our articles, we are focusing on the recent submarine deal between the four countries previously mentioned and listed on the slide. Article 1. Furious over sub-deal, France recalls ambassadors to US and Australia, gives a view from the French perspective and how they feel about the deal. The article was written in the New York Times and was published on September 17th. Article 2. Australia and France intensify war of words over cancelled submarine deal. This gives more of the Australian point of view, and we hear more from their representatives about why the deal was done. This article came from the Financial Times and was also written on September 17th.
In Article 1 titled Furious Over Sub-Deal, France Recalls Ambassadors to the US and Australia, we see the main issue between the United States and France right now being that there is a multi-billion-dollar nuclear-powered submarines contract that typically was always renewed by France and Australia. However, this year, Australia decided to cut the contract with France, and the United States came through and swooped the contract from under France's feet. Due to the fact that the United States and France are allies, the true question behind this article was, is it ethical to take over the contract in such a distasteful way? The multi-billion-dollar contract debacle caused France to pull its ambassadors from both the United States and Australia, the first time this has been done in many years. The core information the author wants to communicate in this article is a feeling of betrayal that France has due to the US taking over the contract deal in such a way that didn't give France a fair fight in order to earn the contract that they so normally have held with Australia. In Article 2, titled Australia and France Intensify a War of Words Over Cancelled Submarine Deal, we see the perspective of how the Australians feel towards this horrible deal. There is evidence that President Biden, who took the contract with the United States from France, would like to calm the whole situation down by speaking with the French president. There's also a strong showing of cultural norms, being that Australians want to put their national interests first before anything else, regardless of how one ally feels about another. This article shows that there seemed to be some dishonesty between the foreign countries, and there's also a new pact brought up titled the AUKUS Pact, which aims to deal with the growing Chinese presence in the Pacific region. That is the whole reason towards the nuclear deal being done with the US and Australia. This article even brings in ties with the United Kingdoms, showing how other foreign countries feel towards the break from the normality of international norms that these foreign countries are used to.
So for how the articles complement each other, both articles address the growing power of China as the primary reason that this deal exists, and both articles mention how there is a desire for the United States to want to protect its allies through the submarine deal. In the articles, it also talks about the United States' attempts at de-escalating the conflict, and the articles show that the French believe that the United States isn't taking this issue as seriously as they should be. Furthermore, interviews from both articles by French representatives state that the United States tends to act for themselves before they do others. Both articles show the French feeling betrayed by both Australia and the United States, and that due to the countries' relationships that this is an unethical deal. In the first article, Macron mentions how it was a stab in the back, and in the second article, Le Dron uses the words lying, duplicity, and states that it's a breach of trust for this deal to have even happened in the first place. Both articles also show the potential long-term effects of France's deals with their allies, with French representatives saying how they likely will be unable to move forward with Australia in the second article, and with France questioning whether it is worth even participating in an American and Chinese conflict in the first article. And now for the differences between the articles. The main difference between the two articles is the viewpoint each one takes on the same exact situation, with the first being seen mostly from the viewpoint of the French, and with the second mostly from the viewpoint of Australia. In the first article, there is more discussion on the politics going on within France, and explains more of why France feels as frustrated as they do with Australia and the United States. For example, the French say that Australia did not warn them ahead of time that they would be switching to the United States for the submarine deal. There is also more perspective from the United States and how they feel about the issue in this article as well. The United States specifically says that they thought France was already warned about this, but the big takeaway is that the United States seems more optimistic about this situation and doesn't see it as a really serious world issue and more of a quarrel among friends. It is also explained that an upcoming French election is why Macron is responding so aggressively towards this issue, as how he deals with the submarine issue could potentially impact the future of his political career. As mentioned before, the second article is mostly from the viewpoint of Australia defending themselves, and much like the United States, Australia also denies that they were dishonest and warned France ahead of time that they had concerns with their deal. Australia also justifies this by saying that America simply gave them a superior deal than the French could. This article also contains perspective from Great Britain and their involvement in the situation, and that their involvement was simply motivated by security issues and that they had no intention of annoying France. And finally, past issues such as Brexit are used as an explanation for why tensions are likely so high within France specifically.
In Chapter 2 of our textbook, the authors state, when people from around the world come together to conduct business, they bring with them different backgrounds, assumptions, expectations, and ways of communicating, each of which is a key part of culture. I think the New York Times article clearly highlights the miscommunication or lack of communication between France, Australia, and the United States. France had expectations that they would continue their 5-year-long relationship deal with Australia up until the surprise news of Australia's new deal with the United States. Also, France has had a strong, long-standing ally relationship with the United States, which surely would have shaped France's perspective and expectations of the US, expecting some type of loyalty. However, the US showed that it had personal interest at heart by not informing France of ongoing negotiations with Australia regarding the submarine deal. The New York Times also states that the deal between the United States and Australia was negotiated and announced without informing France, which shows distasteful communication methods on behalf of both parties. And we could argue that it was unethical behavior as well. This is very much a reflection of the culture in the United States and could also be a reflection of Australia's culture. Further, our textbook in Chapter 13 talks about how companies and even governments should form strategic partnerships in order to create an international expansion or an international presence. Specifically, the authors state the need for trust and valuable inputs make careful partner selection crucial to success. I think this is clearly reflected in the issue that is at hand and how France feels about the entire debacle. France calls the United States and Australia's behavior unacceptable between allies and partners, and they consider it a serious breach of trust, which will obviously influence their thinking on strategic partnership with either country. The United States sees the deal as a way to cement ties with the Pacific ally, which is Australia, and given that there's rise in tension coming from the Chinese, so the United States did what they thought was best for them strategically. The New York Times article emphasizes France's view of the United States' actions being a fundamental strategic shift. This clearly shows that the United States had some type of partnership, strategic partnership interest at heart with Australia. The Financial Times article highlights Australia's stance on taking the deal in a new direction since France's version of submarines are not superior to that operated by the US and the UK. So here we can see how Australia's point of view is also a strategic one, trying to get better products from the United States compared to those of France. And so this whole debacle has been a big issue about strategic partnerships, about products provided either by France or by the United States.
In conclusion, Australia broke a $66 billion agreement to purchase French conventionally powered submarines hours before they publicly announced that they will be purchasing American nuclear powered submarines instead. France saw this as a detestable breach of trust and recalled their ambassadors to both countries. And this is a big deal because even with the tensions between Russia and Trump's administration, neither side pulled their ambassadors. So pulling your ambassadors out of it shows that you have been betrayed, and it's a big display of discontent. America's intention was to solidify their alliance with Australia, who also seeks to contain Chinese expansion. America was already established with France and made a contract in 2016 to contain China. Also, France and Australia had a meeting about this agreement in June of last year, and Australia did not admit that it would be pulling for a better strategic decision. So there's a lot of shaky stuff on both sides, and Australia and America both downplay this betrayal, and they pass the blame back and forth. Their strategic national interest is more important than their relationship with France. The New York Times article emphasizes the France betrayal, whereas the Financial Times article emphasizes Australia's defensiveness and the British involvement in matters. And this will put pressure on France's future relationships with nations and lead to a bigger distrust in their partners. Thank you for watching our presentation.